Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere colder than your office break room and slightly less comforting than your last dental checkup. The Victorian Asylum. Forget haunted houses and true crime podcasts. Victorian asylums were nothing short of horrifying. But don't worry, you're not getting locked up just yet. Before we get started, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from, and let me know what time it is for you and what you might have been locked up in a Victorian asylum for. Now, dim the lights, put on a fan for that soothing Victorian industrial ambience, and get comfortable. Maybe tuck your toes in. Rumour has it, Victorian asylums are where cold feet were invented. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what really happened behind those enormous Gothic doors? What did they serve for breakfast? Was it gruel, or just regret with a side of cabbage? Could you survive a week without your phone, or would you immediately start seeing ghosts in the wallpaper? How did anyone get any sleep surrounded by shrieking, creaking, and a nurse whose idea of comfort was tucking you in with a straitjacket? And, most importantly, could you pass the infamous lunacy tests, or would you end up diagnosed with excessive daydreaming and a tragic lack of posture? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1884. You're in the middle of the Victorian era. The air smells faintly of carbolic acid and institutional despair, and the nurse is already asking intrusive questions about your dreams. Good luck. You arrive at the asylum's looming iron gates, clutching your suitcase and what's left of your dignity. The building towers above you, all Gothic arches and suspiciously clean windows. The only thing thicker than the fog is the sense of impending paperwork. The coach that delivered you here rattles off into the mist, leaving behind a faint smell of horse and abandonment. You look up at the enormous doors that seem to whisper, "We've been waiting for you." Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. Not quite midnight, not quite welcoming. More of a, "We hope you brought a warm coat," and a strong sense of irony. You step forward, suitcase dragging, shoes scuffing along the gravel. The path is lined with gnarled trees and flower beds, so perfectly trimmed that you suspect the staff may actually be using rulers. Your breath clouds the air. Somewhere behind a window, you sense someone is watching. A flicker of movement, a pair of eyes, or maybe just a well-placed potted fern. In a place like this, it's hard to tell. At the entrance, a stern-faced porter greets you by name, which is impressive considering you've only just learned to spell it yourself. He holds out a ledger the size of a tombstone and waits for your signature, his quill hovering ominously. "For the records," he says, as if that explains why you're now being documented more thoroughly than your last tax return. You sign, your name trembling somewhere between optimism and existential dread. The doors groan open, slowly, theatrically, clearly designed to set the mood. You're ushered into a foyer where the air smells like old stone, lavender disinfectant and something else. Hope, maybe, or just leftover cabbage from last week's lunch. It's difficult to be sure. Inside, you're surrounded by walls painted a colour you can only describe as early morning gloom. Portraits of severe Victorians glare down at you from gold frames, their expressions somewhere between stern disappointment and "I know what you did." Every surface gleams, floors waxed to a dangerous shine, banisters polished until you can see your own anxious face reflected back at you. The only dust in sight is the metaphorical kind, lurking behind decades of rules and regulations. You're handed over to a nurse in crisp white, whose smile is both comforting and deeply suspicious. She tells you that the asylum's philosophy is restorative tranquility through routine and fresh air. You notice the windows don't open. You're not sure which is more concerning, the tranquility or the lack of oxygen. She leads you down a long corridor, your footsteps echoing off the stone like you're starring in your own private Gothic drama. Every so often you pass a door with a tiny barred window. Sometimes a face appears, just long enough to disappear again. Sometimes it's a voice, singing, humming, or offering unsolicited advice about the best way to fake a headache during hydrotherapy. Along the way, you're shown the amenities. The communal parlour, no card games after 6. The bathwing bathing is strongly encouraged, but only on Thursdays. And the garden, where walking in tight circles is considered cutting-edge therapy. There's even a reading room, but most of the books are either moral tracts or outdated encyclopedias. If you want a detective novel, you'll have to write your own. Finally, you reach your assigned room. A small, spotless cell furnished with a bed, a thin blanket, and an alarming number of hooks. There's a window, high and narrow, designed for maximum light and minimum escape. The nurse assures you the mattress is stuffed with genuine horsehair, as if that's a feature and not just something to keep you itching all night. As she leaves, you hear the key turn in the lock. There's no going back now. You set your suitcase down, take a seat on the unfamiliar bed, and listen to the sound of distant voices echoing through stone halls. Congratulations. You've officially arrived. First impressions? Let's just say, in the grand tradition of Victorian hospitality, you feel both extremely noticed and completely invisible. And it's only day one. Admission is a breeze, provided someone else does it for you. With just a signature, a vague complaint about nervousness, and possibly a rival with an axe to grind, you're escorted inside for your indefinite holiday in padded luxury. Let's be honest, you don't usually wind up in a Victorian asylum by careful personal choice, unless your favorite hobby is giving up your shoelaces and your last shred of privacy. No, you're here because someone in your life, spouse, sibling, physician, or that one neighbor who's always watching, decided you were peculiar enough to warrant professional supervision. This is an era where excessive reading, melancholy, or just an ill-timed sigh during Sunday roast can be grounds for full institutionalization. In short, if you so much as hum the wrong tune, you're at risk of being invited for a nice long rest. The process begins with a brief and entirely one-sided interview, where the admitting physician listens very carefully to the person who brought you, and almost never to you. The medical man jots down important observations, such as patient fidgeted with hat and asked too many questions. You are asked to state your name, your age, and whether you often think about cabbages. Say yes, and you're fixated. Say no, and you're withholding. It's a no-win scenario. Meanwhile, your committal form is being filled out with a quill that looks like it's been used to admit half the county. Someone will mention your nerves, or your fits of creativity, or how you once reorganized the cutlery drawer by length, and just like that, congratulations, you're officially mad. Occasionally, the doctor will look you up and down, as if checking to see whether you're about to burst into song or simply burst into tears. The legalities are, shall we say, streamlined. 2 signatures, usually from a doctor, and 1 interested party, are all it takes. No jury, no judge. Not even a chance to offer your defense, unless you count that nervous smile you've been practicing since breakfast. Sometimes, all it takes is a sudden inheritance and a family member with an ambitious glint in their eye. Victorian medicine. It's about as scientific as flipping a coin, but with more paperwork and fewer happy endings. Once the ink is dry, the real fun begins. You're led away by a nurse who, depending on her mood, will offer you either gentle encouragement or a grip so firm it could double as blood pressure therapy. You pass through a set of double doors, the kind that close behind you with the soft but final click of abandon hope, ye who enter here. Your luggage, such as it is, vanishes into a mysterious back room, not to be seen again until it's been thoroughly searched for contraband like pencils, shoelaces, or subversive novels. Next, you undergo the infamous admission examination. A doctor with a worryingly energetic moustache takes your pulse, peers into your eyes, and asks you to count backwards from 100 by 7s. If you fail, you're confused. If you succeed, you're showing signs of mania. Again, there is no winning here. They note down your weight, your height, and any identifying scars, moles, or birthmarks. This is less for your medical benefit and more for making sure they can't accidentally swap you with the fellow in room 12 who thinks he's Napoleon. You're given a brief lecture on the asylum rules. No running, no shouting, no keeping pigeons in your room, and absolutely no escape attempts before breakfast. Finally, you are escorted to the cleansing room, where your clothes are exchanged for institution-issue stripes or a faintly starched gown. Your pockets are emptied, your hair is given a perfunctory inspection for signs of either lice or radical political ideas, and you are, at last, a fully admitted resident. Welcome to the Victorian Asylum, where getting in is easy, getting out is complicated, and sanity is strictly optional. The common room is a living catalogue of Victorian anxieties. Some are quietly reading Dickens. Others are convinced Queen Victoria is hiding in the wardrobe. You quickly realise everyone's diagnosis is a work in progress. You shuffle in, uncertain whether to make eye contact or just become one with the wallpaper. The air is thick with a combination of carbolic soap, boiled cabbage, and something less definable, possibly hope, but more likely despair, wearing a friendly mask. A nervous game of chess is unfolding in one corner, using buttons for pawns and an unidentifiable biscuit as the queen. If the biscuit disappears, everyone agrees to just keep playing around the crumbly void. Every asylum resident has a story, and, thanks to Victorian medicine, a suspiciously poetic diagnosis. There's the woman who compulsively sketches cats on every available surface, diagnosed with feline preoccupation. The man who paces the window ledge, reciting Latin poetry, is suffering from classical agitation. And let's not forget the gentleman who insists he's a railway conductor and blows an invisible whistle every time someone enters the room, a case of locomotive delusion, obviously. Your attempts at conversation reveal a social landscape governed by rules no one quite remembers. There are unspoken hierarchies. The quiet philosopher by the fire, the chorus of whisperers by the door, and that one patient who claims to have invented the colour mauve. You make a mental note to avoid sitting in anyone's special chair, especially if that person currently believes it's a throne, a boat, or a portal to the Outer Hebrides. Friendship in the asylum is a cautious endeavour. Introductions are either overly formal, I am the Countess of something or other, recently back from an exhausting trip to the Crimean front, or cryptic, sometimes the sun tells me secrets. Don't ask which ones. Some patients offer you small, mysterious gifts. A torn page from a medical pamphlet, a bent hairpin, or, memorably, a single preserved beetle named Reginald. Every gathering is a support group of sorts. There's the ex-clerk who offers unsolicited financial advice to anyone with a handkerchief, the failed poet who recites limericks backwards, and the middle-aged woman who is convinced her diagnosis is simply excessive disappointment. You will never meet a more creatively anxious crowd in your life. One man, eyes wide, whispers that the staff are reading minds through the wallpaper pattern. Another argues that the bread is being poisoned with melancholy, which, to be fair, is a pretty accurate flavour profile. Of course, not everyone is so animated. Some sit silently in high-backed chairs, wrapped in their own thoughts and an impressive collection of shawls. Others stare into the fireplace with the kind of intensity usually reserved for doomed sea captains. Victorian asylums are nothing if not democratic. Rich or poor, dramatic or reserved, all are united by a firm belief that their diagnosis is either wildly exaggerated or tragically understated. Each patient is monitored by staff with the professional detachment of zookeepers who have seen it all. Don't mind him, a nurse murmurs, as someone recites Hamlet to a pot plant. He's on the calm side today. Even the staff seem faintly exhausted by the sheer variety of creative suffering. The asylum's official register lists dozens of conditions, many invented just last week. Overwrought nerves, rural melancholy, religious mania, unladylike optimism, each worthy of its own Latin label and a disapproving footnote. In time, you begin to understand that these fellow inmates are not just patients, but survivors of an age obsessed with cataloguing every emotion. They swap stories, trade rumours, and invent games that require no more equipment than a sharp tongue and a passing interest in the absurd. If you're lucky, someone will tell you which nurse sneaks biscuits from the kitchen and which doctor can be distracted by a spirited debate about Charles Darwin. It's a society within a society, held together by boredom, resilience, and the world's largest unspoken agreement to ignore the actual reason anyone is here. One thing is certain, you've never met a group so collectively interesting or so completely misunderstood by everyone outside these Gothic walls. The doctor, who looks suspiciously well rested, asks you probing questions about your habits, your sleep, and why you keep twitching whenever he mentions the word lobotomy. You start to wonder if it's safer not to answer at all. You're seated across from him in a high-backed chair that squeaks with every minor fidget. The office is lined with medical tomes and at least 3 busts of famous men who you suspect have never smiled. The window is open just enough to let in a draft, but not enough to permit escape, which is probably intentional. On the desk between you is an alarming stack of paper and, unsettlingly, a large jar labelled nerve tonic, filled with what appear to be suspiciously preserved pickled onions. The doctor picks up his quill, levels you with a gaze that could curdle milk, and begins the inquisition. "How are you feeling today?" he asks, in a tone that suggests there is only one correct answer, and it's not slightly terrified. "Thank you." He scribbles something on the intake form. You haven't said a word yet, but apparently your posture is already diagnostic. He moves briskly down a checklist that seems to cover every possible human frailty, and several that haven't been invented yet. Would you describe your appetite as robust, meager, or entirely dependent on whether the bread is less than 3 days old? How many hours do you sleep? Do you dream of large aquatic birds? He pauses at your hesitation, making a note that may or may not say denies swan-related thoughts. Each question feels less like medicine and more like a game of guess what's wrong with you. The doctor seems particularly interested in the frequency of your headaches, your opinion on the weather, and whether you've ever felt a powerful urge to recite poetry in the presence of vegetables. You realize there's no answer that won't land you somewhere between unstable and dangerously poetic. Occasionally, he glances over his spectacles and murmurs, encouraging phrases like fascinating or curious indeed, before underlining something with so much emphasis you can hear the nib tearing the page. He tests your memory. What day is it? Who is Prime Minister? Your ability to follow instructions, touch your nose, then your left ear, then recite the Lord's Prayer backwards, and your taste in literature. If you admit to enjoying novels, that's a tick under impressionable. If you prefer newspapers, it's agitated by current events. There's a diagnosis for every occasion. The questions grow increasingly specific, drifting from your daily habits into the shadowy world of your mental hygiene. "How often do you bathe?" he asks, while making a pointed note of the mud on your boots. Would you consider yourself optimistic, or the cause of optimism in others? You begin to suspect that simply being alive in Victorian England is enough to warrant concern. And then comes the part you've been dreading. The personal reflection. How is your relationship with your parents? Have you ever considered running away to sea? Do you have opinions on the suffrage movement? Each answer is met with an arched eyebrow and a scribbled phrase you're not allowed to read. He asks you to describe your childhood in 3 words. You panic and blurt out damp, brief, confusing. He seems delighted. Throughout the interview, the doctor's questions get tangled with asides about your handwriting, the speed of your answers, and whether you've recently developed a fondness for potted plants. Occasionally he turns philosophical, asking, "Do you ever wonder about the true nature of the mind?" You stare blankly, wondering about the true nature of lunch. At last, after what feels like 3 hours and a minor existential crisis, the doctor puts down his pen and assures you that you've been most cooperative. You're not sure if that's a compliment or just code for not dangerous enough to warrant immediate hydrotherapy. He stands, shakes your hand, and tells you that the staff will review your case at the weekly meeting, right after they finish deciding what colour to repaint the bath wing. As you're shown out, you realise your fate now rests in a file somewhere between melancholic disposition and tendency towards sarcasm. For now, you're just another intake, diagnosed, documented, and already wondering if you should have lied about the swans. You're shown around, echoing corridors, grand staircases, and more locked doors than a modern escape room. Every turn promises either healing or a surprise cold shower, or both. Your guide is a nurse who manages to glide soundlessly along the polished floors while keeping up a steady stream of cheery explanations. Here at the asylum, we believe architecture is a form of treatment, she chirps, as you step into yet another corridor that appears to have been designed by someone with a personal vendetta against right angles. The ceilings are impossibly high, perfect for trapping the rising warmth, so it never reaches the ground. The walls are painted a soothing shade of faint despair with decorative mouldings that only accentuate the growing sense you've stumbled into a very clinical haunted house. Victorian asylums are built on the grand moral principle that sunlight, symmetry, and a brisk draught are the best medicine for the troubled mind. You pass window after window, each one tall and arched, with light streaming in just enough to illuminate every speck of dust and your own looming shadow. Natural light, the nurse remarks, is vital for recovery. You notice the windows open only a few inches, just enough for fresh air, but not enough to stage a daring escape. These people have thought of everything. The corridors twist and wind, occasionally opening into vast day rooms filled with mismatched chairs, dusty pianos, and the occasional aspidistra that's seen better centuries. Echoes chase you through the halls, footsteps, distant laughter, the unmistakable sound of someone practicing their dramatic soliloquy to the wallpaper. Every now and then, a sharp gust sweeps through, catching you off guard. The ventilation is state-of-the-art, your guide says proudly, as you clutch your institutional issue gown closer around your shoulders. In the Victorian asylum, drafts are not a bug, they're a feature. You pass the grand central staircase, a showpiece of swirling wrought iron and slightly chipped marble. Patients are discouraged from lingering on the stairs, mostly because lingering here means becoming a target for passing doctors who might remember a new experimental therapy. The banisters gleam with the polish of 1,000 nervous hands and the occasional overzealous staff member. Each hallway is punctuated by locked doors, labelled with numbers, mysterious abbreviations, or, in one memorable case, experimental wing, authorized optimists only. You try not to stare through the small frosted panes, but sometimes a pair of eyes stares back, equally curious, equally unsure whether they're looking at a future friend or next Tuesday's chess opponent. You're ushered into the communal washrooms, a marvel of Victorian plumbing and good intentions. Rows of metal basins glint under the gaslights. Hot water Tuesdays and Thursdays, the nurse says, unless the boiler's acting up. She gestures to a row of ancient bathtubs, each slightly more alarming than the last. You make a note to schedule all personal crises for Wednesday mornings. The tour continues past the laundry, where clean sheets and uniforms are produced with military regularity and the gentle undertone of soap and despair. Then to the kitchens, which are bustling with staff, stirring mysterious pots of gruel, the steam drifting upwards to join the persistent chill. The nurse assures you that the food is nutritious and mild, which you suspect is code for inedible but unlikely to cause hallucinations. The highlight, of course, is the gardens. Victorian asylums prided themselves on their landscaped grounds, because nothing says progressive mental health care like a well-raked gravel path and a single bench placed at maximum distance from any possible shade. You're told that daily exercise in the gardens is encouraged for all, though you notice the gate is watched by a very bored orderly with a suspiciously large keyring. Finally, you are shown the recreation room, a place for needlework, reading, and approved amusements. There's a locked cabinet filled with well-thumbed Bibles, dominoes missing their sixes, and, for the truly daring, a well-loved game of chess that's seen more psychological warfare than the rest of the institution combined. The tour ends back at your room with a final reminder. We're always nearby if you need us, or if you try to leave. As the nurse floats away, you're left standing in a hallway that's colder than it ought to be, wondering if fresh air is all it's cracked up to be and quietly plotting your route to the nearest sunbeam. Welcome to the Victorian Asylum, where every door is locked, but the drafts are always free. Say goodbye to personal style. You're issued an outfit that looks like pajamas crossed with a circus tent. On the bright side, it's impossible to lose track of your own clothes when they all look exactly the same. Your transformation begins in the clothing room, which is just a grand name for a chilly little chamber with shelves stacked high with identical garments. A nurse, wielding a measuring tape with the enthusiasm of a medieval torturer, sizes you up with a single glance. "You're a medium, probably," she says, rummaging through the pile. After a brief negotiation with the laws of physics, she hands you an armful of striped linen and a pair of slippers that appear to be made from recycled sandpaper. Changing out of your real clothes is a ritual all its own, a little farewell to individuality and a big hello to institutional chic. You hand over your shoes, your jacket, and anything with a button that could potentially be used for mischief. Your belt and shoelaces vanish into the staff's secret stash, presumably to be reissued in case of a sudden shortage of creativity. Your pockets are turned inside out. Any keepsake, a pocket watch, a lucky coin, that pebble you picked up for no good reason, confiscated for safekeeping, which is Victorian for lost forever. Now for the main event, the asylum uniform. The classic design is a roomy, high-necked smock, generously striped to be both hygienic and psychologically deflating. The color palette ranges from unsalted porridge to damp laundry, and, for special occasions, Monday morning fog. If you're especially lucky, your ensemble comes with a matching cap, designed to keep in exactly zero warmth and display your new institutional allegiance with pride. Trousers, if provided, are shapeless and cinched at the waist by a drawstring that somehow manages to be both too short and too long. Ladies' attire, meanwhile, consists of ankle-length shifts that billow out with every draft, making you look like a windswept tablecloth at a particularly haunted picnic. The effect is less fashion-forward and more fashion-fell backward. The slippers are perhaps the crowning glory. Constructed from something that might once have been fabric but now registers somewhere between cardboard and a wet dream about sand dunes, they offer exactly as much support as a polite suggestion. You shuffle along, acutely aware that everyone else is shuffling in time with you. It's less of a walk and more of a mass, muted sock hop. Personal style is not just discouraged but actively outlawed. Buttons, ribbons, and any decorative flair are removed for safety, though the only thing truly endangered is your sense of self-expression. Attempt to tie your smock in a daring way, and you'll be given a short lecture on the importance of uniformity in the therapeutic environment. Someone, somewhere, once tried to embroider a flower onto their collar, and rumour has it they're still in solitary, cross-stitching daisies onto the wallpaper in their mind. Laundry days bring another unique challenge. Discovering that everyone's identical smock now smells faintly of lie and defeat. There is a strict rotation system, but no matter how carefully you check the tags, you're never entirely sure if you've put on your own clothes or borrowed from the wardrobe of the patient who believes he's a Victorian chimney sweep. Either way, you're wearing history, though not the glamorous kind. There are brief, rebellious attempts at customization. Some patients roll their sleeves in defiance. Others attempt to belt their smocks with contraband string. A few, in a final act of sartorial protest, arrange their slippers just so by their bed, hoping to catch the approving eye of the matron. None of it works. The staff has a sixth sense for subversive fashion. If your collar is even slightly jaunty, expect an immediate wardrobe correction. By the end of your first day in uniform, you come to appreciate the perverse comfort of blending in. No one stands out. There is a sort of equality in looking equally ridiculous. Besides, you'll never stress about what to wear in the morning ever again. In the Victorian Asylum, every day is pajama day and everyone's invited. As the gaslights dim, you're introduced to the Victorian sleep experience. Thin straw mattress, scratchy blanket, and the distant lullaby of someone reciting multiplication tables backwards in the next cell. Sweet dreams. You lie there, surveying your surroundings, wondering if the phrase institutional comfort is an elaborate prank. Your mattress, which is technically more of a suggestion than a piece of furniture, crunches and shifts beneath you. Every time you move, you trigger a symphony of squeaks and rustles that reverberate down the stone corridor. There are lumps in places you didn't know you had places. If you were hoping for something like memory foam, you'll have to settle for vague memory of where a horse once slept. The blanket, woven from a material that feels suspiciously like industrial-grade burlap, provides the comfort of a medieval exfoliation session. You try to wrap it around your body, only to discover it's slightly too short for anyone over 4 feet tall. The effect is either cold feet or a chilly nose, never both warm at the same time. You experiment with diagonal coverage. It does not help. The room itself is sparsely furnished. A bed, a tiny table bolted to the wall, and a rickety chair that looks like it lost a fight with a bad-tempered carpenter. Your window, set high, presumably to discourage nocturnal adventures, lets in just enough moonlight to cast ominous shadows. If you listen closely, you can hear the wind whistling through some forgotten crack, carrying with it the faint but unmistakable scent of boiled cabbage from dinner. Sleep hygiene, Victorian style. It's the sounds that get you. The building settles and sighs in the dark, and you begin to suspect the walls themselves are whispering secrets. Pipes groan overhead, doors creak on ancient hinges, and every so often you hear the unmistakable echo of someone muttering about prime numbers or the Boer War. Footsteps patrol the hall at regular intervals, heavy, deliberate, and not especially comforting. It's the orderly on the night shift, conducting the hourly bed check with the stealth of a parade drumline. You try to focus on your own breathing, but your neighbor is snoring in a rhythm that could be described as freeform jazz. Down the hall, someone starts singing softly, a tune that may or may not be about pudding. Somewhere else, a heated debate breaks out, something about the existence of giraffes. If you ever wondered what the inside of your own brain sounded like at 3 a.m., the asylum's night chorus has you covered. Occasionally, the quiet is broken by the staff, a nurse gliding by with a lantern, her shoes somehow both silent and terrifying, the matron's keyring jangling like the bells of doom, or the gentle yet accusatory clatter of a tea tray. You quickly learn that there is an art to pretending to be asleep. Slow, measured breathing, blanket pulled just so. Should anyone peek in to ensure you're not causing trouble, daydreaming, or plotting an escape through the ventilation system. If sleep does come, it arrives in short, confused bursts. You drift off for a while, only to be awakened by a sudden cold draft, a burst of distant laughter, or the alarming sensation that your pillow is actively plotting against you. The straw pokes through the ticking, and you make a mental note to request extra stuffing, a request that will of course be gently ignored. Still, there's a strange camaraderie in these nighttime rituals. The unspoken knowledge that everyone is having the same rough night. Tossing, turning, and composing strongly worded complaints to be delivered to the complaint box, which is naturally just an empty box nailed shut. The walls may whisper, but so do you. Quiet curses, secret hopes, and the occasional giggle when someone farts spectacularly in the darkness. As dawn creeps over the windowsill, you're bleary-eyed and somewhat wiser. You've survived another night in the Victorian Asylum, where rest is rare, comfort is imaginary, and the lullabies are performed entirely by strangers who have forgotten the words. Sweet dreams indeed. The dining hall is a temple to lukewarm food. You're served a nutritious grey paste, a limp slice of bread, and tea so weak it's basically water with commitment issues. You shuffle into the great echoing space along with a line of fellow inmates, most of whom look as if they haven't slept since the last time Queen Victoria smiled. The air buzzes with the polite murmur of hunger and the not-so-polite clatter of cutlery on metal trays. If you're lucky, you claim a seat near a drafty window for a fleeting moment of fresh air and the privilege of a view, a patch of gravel, one sullen crow, and the back end of the kitchen garden. The meal is served by an orderly with the solemn gravity of someone distributing court summonses. The gruel arrives first, a steaming, glutinous blob, somehow both runny and congealed. It's hard to tell if it's meant to be sweet or savory. It tastes, resolutely, like nothing at all. You add a dash of salt from a communal shaker that's mostly just clumps. Some ambitious soul asks if there's sugar today. The orderly laughs in the kind of way that makes you stop asking questions. Your slice of bread, a masterclass in soggy disappointment, flops over your fingers like a limp handshake. It is technically edible, though the crust is an existential riddle. How can something be both rubbery and sharp at once? You ponder this as you try to spread a faint scraping of butter that is actually more margarine, more lard, or more rumour than any known dairy product. Most patients approach the bread with resignation. Those with dental ambition attempt to bite. Those without simply dunk it in the tea, which is, generously speaking, warm. Ah, the tea. Victorian asylums prided themselves on offering tea at every meal, but this is less a beverage and more an act of hope. It's brown, sort of. It smells faintly of leaves and even more faintly of feet. One sip, and you realize this is the kind of drink designed not to wake you up, but to gently lower your expectations for the rest of the day. You long for a real cup of coffee, or even a glass of water, but remember that water in Victorian Britain is best avoided unless you have a fondness for cholera. Breakfast is a strictly regimented affair. You have exactly 15 minutes to eat. Less if the matron is in a hurry, more if the staff is distracted by someone attempting to barter their bread for a second helping of paste. Conversation is permitted, but only about the weather, the Queen's health, or other topics unlikely to cause excitement. One patient tries to launch a philosophical debate about the merits of toast. This is shut down immediately. As you eat, you notice the rituals everyone adopts to survive the meal. Some methodically sort their food, creating a neat line of bread soldiers to be dipped, one by one, in the gruel. Others shovel everything together in an effort to overwhelm their taste buds into submission. There's always one optimist who claims the tea is not so bad today. No one believes them. The staff surveys the room, watching for trouble or signs of unauthorized enjoyment. Somewhere, a nurse pours herself a cup of something suspiciously fragrant, probably the good tea, reserved for people who don't have to wear striped pajamas. At a nearby table, someone's managed to smuggle in a crust of real bread, smuggled in by a visiting relative. This small act of culinary rebellion is celebrated in whispers and jealous glances, until the crust disappears in a single, triumphant gulp. By the time breakfast is over, you feel both nourished and subtly defeated. You rise with the others, return your tray, and shuffle back to the day's schedule, fueled by carbohydrates, disappointment, and the vague hope that tomorrow's tea might actually taste like tea. And so, another day begins in the Victorian Asylum, where breakfast is less a meal and more a team-building exercise in mutual endurance. If you can survive the gruel, the bread, and the tea, you can survive just about anything. Your day is strictly organized. There's occupational therapy, knitting until your fingers bleed, recreation, staring at pigeons, and, for variety, silent reflection on your life choices. The schedule is posted every morning on a chalkboard, so clean it could double as a surgical table. The handwriting is impossibly neat, suggesting that somewhere in the asylum there is at least one person thriving on routine and chalk dust. Your day begins with gentle wake-up at precisely 7 o'clock. Gentle, of course, meaning the matron throws open the curtains and claps her hands with the enthusiasm of a professional drum major. After breakfast, a culinary adventure you've already survived, you're shuffled with the others to occupational therapy. This is the Victorian belief that busy hands make for a quiet mind, or at least keep you too distracted to notice the drafts. If you're skilled with a needle, you're issued a basket of tangled yarn and encouraged to knit scarves, blankets, or in one infamous case, a makeshift rope. The staff caught on quickly. Now all knitting needles are blunted, and the only patterns allowed are scarf or square. If you're not inclined toward textiles, there's always basket weaving, which starts with high hopes and usually ends with a lopsided masterpiece that doubles as a hat in a strong wind. Mid-morning brings physical recreation. For most patients, this means a stroll around the gravel paths in the garden, following a leader who walks as if auditioning for a parade. There's a polite competition to spot the fattest pigeon, though the birds seem equally interested in your shoes. Occasionally, the staff produces a battered croquet set, but play is always cut short when someone attempts to stage a daring escape via hoop. After the excitement of the outdoors, you return inside for rest hour. This is less about actual rest, and more about sitting very still while contemplating the wallpaper and wondering whether you could have made better life choices if you'd taken up dentistry instead of poetry. The silence is occasionally broken by someone sighing dramatically or attempting to sneak a nap, both activities strictly monitored for signs of excessive contentment. Then comes group reflection. You and your fellow patients gather in a circle and are gently coaxed to share your thoughts, feelings, or, at the very least, the weather. Most patients respond with vague platitudes. A bit chilly today, I think, but there's always one who launches into an elaborate monologue about the tragic state of Victorian furniture. The staff nods sagely, jotting notes in a ledger so large it could crush a moderate-sized cat. After lunch, mildly less traumatic than breakfast, you have individual activities. The options range from supervised reading in the library, approved materials only, the Bible, the Pilgrim's Progress, and a 3-year-old gardening almanac, to music hour, which is mostly an exercise in patience as someone attempts greensleeves on an out-of-tune piano. Art therapy is available, but all drawings must be appropriate and uplifting, which rules out most honest self-portraits. Afternoon brings another round of occupational therapy, this time with more supervision and less hope. If you're lucky, you're assigned to assist with the garden, which means you can sneak the occasional earthworm into your pocket as a pet. Everyone's coping differently. For the truly restless, there's laundry duty, an endless loop of soaping, rinsing, and wondering whether socks are meant to have holes. Finally, evening free time arrives. This is the part of the day where you're theoretically allowed to pursue hobbies. But most patients spend it writing letters they'll never send, rearranging dominoes, or, for the particularly bold, plotting small acts of rebellion, like swapping seat cushions or learning French from a smuggled phrasebook. As night falls, the routine resets. The staff assure you that structure is healing. You're inclined to agree, if only because the alternative is chaos. And after a day of knitting, pigeon watching, and existential reflection, a little chaos might actually sound like fun. You're led to the hydrotherapy room, where water is the cure for all ills. Expect everything from cold baths to surprise hoses, Victorian for wellness spa. The first thing you notice about the hydrotherapy suite is the smell. It's a heady blend of damp towels, cheap soap, and the faint tang of disappointment. The tiles on the floor are a shade of blue that can only be described as wishful thinking. Rows of enormous porcelain tubs line the walls, each one filled and drained with the same authority as a royal decree. Water drips rhythmically from pipes above, a gentle reminder that someone is always ready to turn a valve and change your destiny from lukewarm to Arctic at a moment's notice. Your attendant, a nurse with the posture of a sergeant major, explains the therapeutic principles with a pamphlet in one hand and a thermometer in the other. You're told that water in all its forms, steam, splash, or outright torrent, can soothe the anxious mind, cleanse the melancholy soul, and if nothing else, wake up anyone who thought a morning nap was on the schedule. Hydrotherapy, they assure you, is at the cutting edge of Victorian science. You try to look reassured as she hands you a thin, drafty towel and instructs you to brace yourself. The experience begins with the cool plunge, a time-honored tradition where you're invited to step into a tub filled to the brim with water that feels like it was drawn directly from a North Sea iceberg. The nurse sets a timer because science demands suffering be measurable. You do your best to maintain dignity as every muscle contracts in a collective gasp. Invigorating, isn't it? She says, as your teeth chatter Morse code. If you survive the plunge, you're rewarded with the douche, a misleadingly polite word for being hosed down like a recalcitrant houseplant. There is, apparently, a therapeutic distinction between the jet douche for rebalancing your nerves, the spray douche for reinvigorating your spirit, and the surprise from behind douche for testing your commitment to staying upright. You stand there, arms at your sides, as a stream of water arcs toward you from across the room with impressive and inescapable accuracy. You wonder, briefly, if you are the first human ever to be both medically cleansed and emotionally waterboarded in the same session. Next is the blanket pack, a spa experience in which you're wrapped head to toe in damp sheets and left to contemplate your sins. The theory is that it will draw out impurities and calm the agitated mind. In practice, you look like a slightly startled burrito and spend 20 minutes pondering whether you're being cured or marinated. A fellow patient across the room gives you a sympathetic nod from within his own linen cocoon. The highlight for many is the steam bath, a wooden box large enough for you and your sense of regret. Your head sticks out of a hole at the top so you can still answer probing questions about your childhood while the rest of you gently poaches. Sweat is considered a sign that the treatment is working, or at least that your circulatory system is as confused as you are. Throughout your hydrotherapy journey, attendants bustle about, adjusting dials, tightening straps, and making brisk notes about your tolerance to aquatic stimuli. Conversation is limited to inquiries about your comfort level. On a scale from 1 to numb, how are we doing? And reminders not to attempt synchronized swimming. By the end of the session, you're damp, cold, and extremely aware of every nerve ending. You're offered a scratchy towel and the chance to air dry, which is a polite way of saying stand in a draft until you're mostly dry and entirely confused. Hydrotherapy may not cure what ails you, but it will certainly make you forget about breakfast, knitting, or anything except the immediate reality of being very, very wet in a Victorian asylum. Congratulations. You're now officially cleansed, refreshed, and just a little bit more suspicious of water. Staff insist that polite conversation and upright posture will heal your mind. If you're not cheerful enough, you're sent to sit quietly in the reflection chair, the original office timeout. Victorian asylums were deeply invested in the belief that the path to sanity was paved with impeccable manners, well-timed pleasantries, and a back as straight as a flagpole. Welcome to moral management, where your mental health is measured by how convincingly you can smile during group activities and whether you thank matron for another serving of bread that tastes like existential crisis. Every morning, the staff circulate the halls armed not with medicine or comfort, but with a bottomless supply of encouraging slogans. Remember, they remind you, a sunny disposition chases away the clouds of the mind. Never mind that the only sun you've seen all week was painted on the rec room wall by someone with a fear of yellows. If you look too gloomy, a nurse will gently reposition your lips into what she calls a smile and what you call worrying facial paralysis. Conversation is considered both therapy and test. There are strict guidelines. Never discuss politics, religion, or the suspicious stain in the corner of the dining hall. Acceptable topics include the weather, Queen Victoria's resilience, and the remarkable consistency of the mashed turnips. Silence is tolerated only if it's thoughtful. Brooding, sighing, or gazing wistfully into the middle distance are not. Each day's performance is evaluated, with notes added to your record. Patient attempted to tell a joke not found amusing. Recommend additional posture drills. Speaking of posture, slouching is a cardinal sin in the land of moral management. Shoulders back, chin up, hands neatly folded in your lap. There are daily posture inspections, led by a stern orderly whose own spinal column appears to be made of wrought iron. Any sign of relaxation is swiftly corrected. If you so much as lean, you'll be asked if you need a little encouragement. Decline, and you're introduced to the reflection chair. The reflection chair, positioned in the main hallway under a portrait of a particularly disappointed founding benefactor. It's a hard wooden seat with absolutely no padding and an unrivaled view of absolutely nothing. Here, you are to reflect on your behavior until you can demonstrate a suitably positive attitude. Some patients use the time to recite poetry. Others plot elaborate revenge on the person who invented linoleum, and at least one patient just naps upright out of spite. In the group parlor, polite conversation hour is scheduled daily. You gather in a semicircle, each person armed with a topic card. The bravest among you draws The Advantages of Early Rising, which inspires a heated but civil debate about whether it's worth waking up for breakfast gruel. The matron listens, nodding approvingly whenever someone employs a new adjective or references a moral virtue. Bonus points for mentioning self-restraint, temperance, or the healing power of embroidery. There is also the daily act of kindness quota, helping another patient fold their blanket, offering a compliment about someone's slippers, or remembering to address the staff as ma'am or sir all earn you a gold star on the progress board. Too many missed opportunities, and you'll be consigned to extra reflection, where you may be invited to write an essay on the subject of humility. Of course, the system has its flaws. The staff's unwavering cheeriness is contagious, if only in a low-grade, please let me have a nap sort of way. Most patients learn to fake a polite interest in the day's events, and more than one has developed a permanent smile just from muscle memory. By the end of your first week, you've become a master of small talk. Your posture rivals that of a royal guard, and you can produce a polite laugh on demand. You might not be cured, but you're definitely nice about it. In the Victorian Asylum, kindness is not just encouraged, it's compulsory. And if you forget, well, there's always the reflection chair, waiting patiently for your next bout of unapproved brooding. If you're suffering from hysteria, i.e. being tired of it all, congratulations, you'll be prescribed several weeks of bed rest. No reading, no talking, just lying absolutely still. Try not to blink too enthusiastically. The rest cure is the Victorian answer to everything. Anxiety, nerves, stubborn opinions, or simply not enjoying the gruel at breakfast. Instead of a spa retreat, you're sent to a small, sunlit room and told to think peaceful thoughts, which is a real challenge when the only decoration is a faded painting of a single potato and the constant soundtrack of someone coughing 2 doors down. A nurse brings you to your new quarters with all the enthusiasm of someone checking inventory at a sock factory. You're tucked in with military precision and given instructions. Do not get up, do not speak unless spoken to, and absolutely no sneaking novels under your pillow. At first, you think this doesn't sound so bad. A break from the daily routine of polite conversation, posture drills, and surprise hydrotherapy? Sign you up. You try to find a comfortable position on your straw mattress, which, much like a moral dilemma, never feels quite right. The blanket, heavy enough to discourage escape, pinches at your toes and tugs at your imagination. You spend the first hour watching a single fly circle the ceiling, then realize you have about 167 more hours of this to go. Your meals arrive on a tray, delivered by a nurse who seems determined to set the world record for most silent footsteps. Food consists of boiled things, potatoes, eggs, what you hope is chicken, and a glass of milk that tastes of every barnyard you've never wanted to visit. Eating in silence is encouraged, so you become an expert at chewing thoughtfully and nodding to no one in particular. The rest cure, as prescribed by the good doctor, forbids all mental stimulation. No books, no sketching, no letters from home, not even a polite chat with the houseplants. You try to pass the time by memorizing the cracks in the plaster and composing operas in your head, starring yourself, the potato painting, and the fly as your supporting cast. You lose the plot halfway through Act 2, which may or may not be a symptom of recovery. Visitors are rare, and when they do appear, they're told to keep conversations short and topics soothing. Any mention of modern life or exciting news is strictly off limits. You're allowed to ask about the weather, but only if you're prepared for a 20-minute monologue on drizzle after the third update on cloud patterns. You seriously consider faking sleep as a survival strategy. Your days blend together like a particularly bland soup. The highlight is when a nurse comes in to fluff your pillow or, if you're really lucky, opens a window to let in a bit of air. There's a rumor among patients that the rest cure was invented by someone who secretly hated napping. A week in, You'd do anything for a crossword puzzle or the chance to recite the alphabet backwards just for the mental gymnastics. As the days drag on, you start to understand why so many former rest cure patients emerge with a new appreciation for embroidery, stamp collecting, and the fine art of daydreaming about literally anywhere else. Your mind wanders to wild places. Perhaps you'll rise as the world's slowest escape artist, or maybe you'll start a pillow-based semaphore to communicate with your neighbor. Anything to break the monotony. Eventually the doctor returns, notebook in hand, to ask how you're feeling. If you say rested, you risk another week. If you say bored, you risk an extra lecture on the value of stillness. If you just stare into the distance and sigh, congratulations, you're officially pronounced calmer, which is Victorian for sufficiently subdued. You are now released back into the general population, blinking at the brightness of activity and aching to do anything at all. Congratulations, you've survived the rest cure, proof that sometimes the cure is at least as maddening as the disease. At dinner, you're treated to a hearty stew that tastes like Victorian mystery and faint regret. Conversation is encouraged, but only if it's about the weather or the Queen. You shuffle into the dining hall alongside a conga line of equally hungry and equally confused inmates. The tables are set with utilitarian precision. Thick ceramic bowls, dull spoons heavy enough to serve as blunt instruments, and hunks of bread that could double as doorstops in a pinch. The staff watch from the perimeter like nervous zookeepers, ensuring nobody swaps portions, starts a food fight, or attempts to escape using nothing but mashed turnip and pure ambition. Your bowl of stew is presented with the flourish of a grand unveiling. A fragrant cloud rises, followed closely by suspicion. The ingredients are best described as meat-adjacent. Is it beef, lamb, or something that used to moo, cluck, or simply lurk? Even the kitchen staff don't know for sure. You prod at the floating chunks and try not to make eye contact with anything that looks like it might float away under its own power. Each bite is an exercise in optimism, your taste buds clinging to the hope that the next spoonful might contain a flavor not found on the periodic table of elements. Conversation at dinner is gently monitored for signs of excitement or rebellion. The matron herself drifts down the aisle, ears primed for scandal. There are safe topics, rainfall totals, the reliability of the town clock, the number of pigeons on the asylum roof. A single mention of politics, romance, or the suspicious absence of last week's head orderly is enough to earn a sharp look and a gentle reminder that dinner is a time for serenity. Someone always attempts to sneak in a joke about the Queen's hat. Someone else always coughs to cover the laughter. Despite the restrictions, mealtimes are prime social currency. Old-timers share coded messages about the best way to trade bread crusts for extra potatoes. New arrivals try to figure out who sits, where, and which seat is blessed by the absence of a draft. There's a careful choreography of spoon to bowl and bread to mouth, and an unspoken rule that the first person to finish must wait quietly, staring at the ceiling, until everyone else is done. The stew is accompanied by vegetables that taste like they were cooked with the primary goal of being inoffensive. Carrots dissolve at the touch. Peas collapse on sight. And turnips, well, the less said about the turnips, the better. The bread, always stale but reliably so, is best used as an edible utensil for sopping up the broth and for performing small, polite acts of tableside demolition. On rare occasions, there's pudding for dessert. The pudding is the colour of hope and the texture of old wallpaper paste, but it is received with the reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. A single, small spoonful is enough to inspire whispered stories of the great rice pudding incident of '82, in which someone claimed to find an almond and was briefly elevated to the rank of legend. As dinner draws to a close, there is a ritual scraping of bowls, the subdued burp of a contented patient, and the universal sigh of people who know they have survived another meal. The staff circulate, collecting trays and distributing the evening's medication with the solemnity of a priest administering last rites. You shuffle away from the table, feeling both fortified and defeated, ready to face the rest of the evening on a foundation of mystery, meat, and collective endurance. Here in the Victorian Asylum, dinner is never just about food. It's a chance to be social, to practice your conversational tap dance, and to test your digestive resilience. Tomorrow's menu? Probably stew again, but at least the company is reliably unpredictable. The doctors have devised ingenious tests to prove your insanity. Can you draw a clock? Do you cry at poetry? Have you ever had a headache? Sorry, guilty on all counts. Welcome to the Victorian Asylum's diagnostic obstacle course, where every quirk, sneeze, or thoughtful sigh is a potential symptom, and normality is an ever-shrinking bullseye. Your first appointment in the examination room begins with the ceremonial sharpening of pencils, and the kind of eye contact that suggests you're about to be accused of witchcraft. A team of doctors, 3 minimum, all with sideburns of varying authority, leans in and asks you to perform a series of simple tasks. First up, the infamous clock drawing test. A piece of paper is placed before you, along with a pencil so dull it may as well be a stick of celery. Draw the time. 10 minutes past 2, intones the lead doctor, as if the fate of the empire hangs in the balance. You give it your best shot, only to find the hands have a mind of their own. The doctors confer in hushed tones. Interesting interpretation of time, one whispers, as if you've just confessed to being both a poet and a possible time traveler. The result is carefully recorded in your file. Next is the poetry assessment. The doctors present you with a slim volume of verse, then sit back, arms folded, to watch your reaction. If you shed a tear at the tragic fate of the nightingale, it's excessive sentimentality. If you laugh at the limericks, inappropriate affect. If you simply look confused, you're emotionally blunted. In the world of Victorian psychology, the only safe response is to nod solemnly and then try not to make direct eye contact with the wallpaper. There's a quick memory test. Repeat these 3 objects: apple, candle, king. If you hesitate or swap one out for turnip, you are deemed to have a wandering mind. Bonus points if you can recite the sequence backward, though don't look too pleased with yourself. Pride, after all, is another red flag. Physical symptoms are always of keen interest. Do you ever get headaches? A doctor asks, looking up expectantly. If you say yes, you're exhibiting classic symptoms of nervous tension. If you say no, you're in denial. If you respond with, only when forced to participate in psychological testing, you'll be gently reminded that sarcasm is not an approved coping mechanism, unless, of course, you're one of the doctors. There's the mirror test. Stand before your own reflection and describe what you see. If you fix your hair, it's vanity. If you don't, it's self-neglect. One patient famously blinked and was subsequently noted as having excessive ocular activity. You wonder if you're failing simply by breathing. No Victorian evaluation is complete without a moral inventory. You are asked to rate your own honesty, humility, and, strangely, your fondness for dairy products. A low score means insufficient moral development. A high score suggests delusions of virtue. The only way to win is not to play. But unfortunately, participation is mandatory. Sometimes, you're treated to a word association game. The doctor says sunshine, you reply with rain. They scribble something. You say queen, and someone writes, possibly treasonous. If you answer too quickly, you're impulsive. Too slowly, and you're withdrawn. There is no Goldilocks zone, just an ever-growing list of observations for your already bulging file. When it's all over, the doctors gather your papers and nod gravely, as if they've just discovered a new species of human oddity. Interesting, they say. Very interesting. You are left alone in the room, wondering if you've passed, failed, or just become a footnote in the great ledger of Victorian eccentricity. In the end, the only certainty is that you've been thoroughly tested, and that in the eyes of the Victorian Asylum, the line between madness and simply being interesting is about as thin as the tea at breakfast. Once a month, relatives are allowed to visit. Most spend the entire hour pretending nothing's wrong and commenting on the lovely wallpaper, which honestly is the most disturbing thing in the building. The anticipation begins at sunrise. The matron makes sure everyone is tidied up to a presentable level of not currently escaping, hair is brushed, and uniforms straightened. You're told to look bright, and do try to keep the twitching to a minimum. The visiting room is prepared, smelling of lavender, damp stone, and the ever-present whiff of boiled cabbage from the kitchen below. You're herded into the designated parlour, an over-furnished chamber where flowers wilt bravely in a chipped vase, and the chairs have been strategically placed for maximum supervision. Staff patrol the perimeter, wielding clipboards and the kind of smiles that say, "Go ahead, try something." There's a special tray of refreshments, stale shortbread, and tea brewed to the strength of faint hope. Then, like contestants in the world's most awkward game show, the families arrive. There's your mother, already teary, your uncle, who keeps glancing at the exits, and of course, your aunt. She arrives in a swirl of perfume and unsolicited advice, clutching her handbag like she's about to smuggle you out or scold you back to health. She sits with a purposeful sigh, looks around, and declares, "Well, it's much nicer than I expected, and just look at that wallpaper." No one ever asks what you think of the wallpaper, which is for the best, because it seems to be patterned after the concept of regret. Conversation during visits is a tightrope walk over a pit of emotional quicksand. Everyone wants to know how you're doing, but no one wants an honest answer. If you say, "Fine," they look relieved and quickly pivot to the weather. If you mention the hydrotherapy hoses or the questionable meat at dinner, they shush you with an almost supernatural force. Your cousin asks if you've made any nice friends. You mention the gentleman convinced he's Queen Victoria's lost twin, and suddenly your cousin has a pressing need to study the tea leaves at the bottom of his cup. Your aunt, of course, is there to help. She gives you a pep talk about keeping your chin up and offers the kind of advice only an aunt can muster. Have you tried smiling more? She's heard about the reflection chair and is convinced it's where the real progress happens. She tells you, in hushed tones, that you'll be out in no time if you just agree with everything the doctor says and stop talking about the French Revolution at supper. Staff are always within earshot, pretending not to listen, but taking notes just in case your father tries to slip you a copy of a mildly controversial newspaper. Hugs are permitted, but only under supervision, and only if both parties promise not to pass secret messages or keys. You try to pass the time by nibbling the shortbread, but it tastes of dust and awkwardness. At some point, every family runs out of safe topics. There's a collective sigh, and then the ritual complimenting of the grounds begins. Such lovely gardens, your uncle declares, as though the sight of a well-raked path might cure anything. Your mother squeezes your hand and assures you she's praying every day. Your aunt promises to speak to the doctor about the temperature in your room, as if climate control is the key to sanity. When the visit finally ends, your family stands in a huddle near the door, waving a little too vigorously, promising to return next month. The staff usher them out, the tea tray is whisked away, and the wilted flowers are replaced. You're left with the quiet hum of the clock and the faint echo of your aunt's advice ringing in your ears. Family visits in the Victorian Asylum, comforting, confusing, and proof that sometimes the wallpaper really is the best part of the conversation. Treatment options are plentiful. Bloodletting, spinning chairs, blistering plasters, and the always popular surprise mustard foot bath. Evidence-based medicine, Victorian style. If you ever thought the worst thing about being in an asylum was the company, you haven't yet sampled the cures. Victorian doctors are firm believers in the philosophy of, if it isn't working, try it again, but wetter, bloodier, or at a higher rotational speed. Here, medical innovation is measured not in recovery rates, but in how many towels you go through in a day. Let's start with the classics, bloodletting. It's the original all-purpose solution for everything from anxiety to headaches to simply being too lively. A doctor arrives, sleeves rolled, holding a small bowl and a set of leeches that look far too enthusiastic. You're assured that having your bad humors drained will clear your mind, boost your spirits, and probably not require a transfusion. If you're not a fan of the squirming, you can opt for the more modern approach, a quick nick of the vein, and a polite request to faint decorously. Then there's the blistering plaster, a patch soaked in mystery chemicals and slapped on your skin until it raises a blister the size of your optimism. The theory? Draw out the illness through the skin. The reality? You get a temporary distraction from your existential dread, plus a bonus conversation starter for group reflection. There's always someone eager to show off their latest blister, Victorian one-upmanship at its finest. If those don't take your fancy, perhaps you'd like a turn in the rotating chair. Picture an upright wooden contraption that looks like the unholy union of a desk chair and a fairground ride. You're strapped in, spun around at dizzying speeds, and told it's for your own good. Supposedly, this restores balance to the humors. In practice, it mostly separates you from your lunch. If you're lucky, you'll exit the chair with only a mild case of vertigo and a strong resolve never to complain about knitting again. For the nervous and agitated, there's always cold water therapy. A sudden dousing from a high window, a quick bath in ice water, or, if you're truly unlucky, the surprise hose treatment. There's something about a jet of water aimed at your person that focuses the mind, usually on how to avoid tomorrow's session. The staff assure you it's refreshing. You assure them you'll be shivering until Michaelmas. And then there's the more experimental fare. The surprise mustard foot bath. A basin of warm water mixed with enough mustard powder to startle a horse. You're instructed to soak your feet and contemplate your many failings while the skin on your toes tingles, burns, and eventually feels as though it's auditioning for a circus fire act. Supposedly, this encourages circulation and humility. In reality, it's just another way to keep you from running away. No one escapes with feet that smell like a condiment shelf. Let's not forget the sedative draught, a mysterious potion guaranteed to quiet the restless mind. No one knows what's in it. Some claim it's laudanum, others swear it's just old tea with a hint of despair. Either way, after a dose, you're likely to sleep through the next group reflection or, at the very least, temporarily forget the rotating chair ever happened. All treatments, of course, are delivered with the utmost seriousness by staff who have memorized the Latin names for every unfortunate side effect. Therapeutic suffering, they call it, which is a poetic way of saying, you'll thank us later, or you won't. By the end of your first month, you've survived more cures than you ever thought possible. You're not sure if you're healthier, but you are certainly more cautious whenever anyone in an apron enters the room carrying a tray. Victorian Asylum treatments. Never boring, rarely effective, and always memorable. If you make it through unscathed, you might just be ready for anything modern medicine can throw at you. Or at least a quiet foot bath with no mustard. Every asylum has a legend. Someone who tunneled out, disguised themselves as a nun, or simply wandered off and was mistaken for a visiting dignitary. Planning your own escape is just good manners. The Victorian Asylum is built like a fortress, with gates, guards, and the world's least forgiving hedges. But human ingenuity, especially when combined with the motivation of another round in the rotating chair, knows no bounds. The hallways hum with tales of would-be escapees, whispered after lights out or exchanged through coded notes folded into napkins at breakfast. You quickly learn there's an entire subculture dedicated to plotting the perfect getaway, complete with blueprints, diversion tactics, and the odd conspiracy theory involving secret passageways and hidden keys. It starts innocently enough. A fellow patient, eyes gleaming with the thrill of rebellion, sidles up and asks, "If you were a window latch, would you rather be left-handed or right?" It's less a question and more of an invitation to join the Asylum Underground Railroad. Before long, you're studying the daily routines of the orderlies, memorizing shift changes, and, crucially, learning which nurse can be bribed with a bit of extra bread. The classics never go out of style. There's the laundry cart gambit, where a daring soul attempts to hide beneath a pile of damp sheets and hopes no one notices the mysterious, loaf-shaped lump rolling down the hallway, or the garden wall shuffle, which involves scaling a stone wall under the cover of enthusiastic croquet. One patient even tried the feigning royalty method, donning a makeshift crown from pudding tins and marching straight out the front gate, waving regally and demanding a carriage. It almost worked, until the gatekeeper asked to see his credentials. For the romantically inclined, there's the storied elopement. Two inmates fall madly in love over a shared dislike of boiled cabbage and decide that freedom tastes better together. There are notes hidden in Bibles, secret meetings in the laundry room, and eventually a moonlit dash for the outer fence. The staff, who have seen it all, usually just shake their heads and add another tick to the escape ledger. At least it's good exercise, the matron remarks, watching from the window. But most attempts are far less glamorous. There's the slow and steady approach. A patient simply walks out the main door during visitor hour, carrying a clipboard and an air of authority. No one questions paperwork. Another famous escapee blended in with the kitchen staff for 3 whole days, wearing an apron and perfecting the art of peeling potatoes. He was finally caught when he started offering unsolicited advice on gravy. The reality is, actual escape is rare. The doors are heavy, the windows barred, and the grounds patrolled by orderlies whose main qualification is an uncanny ability to spot suspicious loitering. Still, planning is half the fun. It gives you something to think about during hydrotherapy, something to whisper about over gruel, and an endless source of entertainment during rest cure. There's even a friendly competition. Patients keep unofficial scorecards for best attempt, most dramatic failure, and most creative use of laundry. Prizes are purely honorary, a place in the annals of asylum folklore, immortalized in the retellings, with details growing more outrageous every month. Did she really scale the ivy with nothing but a knitting needle and willpower? Was that really the chaplain disguised as a patient? Or just a patient disguised as the chaplain? Only the walls know for sure. In the end, most people stay, not because they've given up hope, but because there's a peculiar camaraderie in plotting what you'll never actually do. Even the staff seem to understand. A little bit of daydreaming about freedom is, in its own way, therapeutic. So, as you lay in bed at night, listening to the distant clang of the gates and the quiet snoring of your neighbor, you can't help but smile. After all, everyone loves a good escape story, even if you're only escaping into your imagination. Orderlies do everything: serve meals, mop floors, and occasionally save your life from a runaway therapy goat. Their main job is to look stern and pretend nothing here is weird. You'll spot them first thing in the morning, bustling through the halls with a combination of military discipline and the resignation of someone who's already seen 3 escape attempts before breakfast. Each is armed with an enormous key ring, a battered notebook, and the kind of watchful expression that suggests they once auditioned to be Victorian gargoyles. The orderlies are the backbone of asylum life, part guardian, part zookeeper, part amateur psychoanalyst. Their duties are never-ending. At any hour, you might find an orderly chasing after a rolling bread cart, escorting a nervous patient to hydrotherapy, or breaking up a heated debate about whether the Queen secretly invented marmalade. In one moment, they're serving up trays of gruel with the solemnity of a high priest, and the next, they're mopping mysterious stains while reminding everyone, if you didn't see it happen, it didn't happen. Orderlies know every nook and cranny of the building. They're the unofficial keepers of secret passageways, hidden cupboards, and the exact location where Nurse Hargreaves hides the good biscuits. They can spot a missing slipper at 20 paces and know, by intuition alone, which patients are plotting to trade theirs for a slightly softer blanket. If you ever need to hide contraband, like an extra hunk of bread or a forbidden novel, just know that the orderlies have probably already found it, catalogued it, and put it back with a discreetly raised eyebrow. Despite their stern exteriors, orderlies are the silent support network of the institution. They listen to complaints about the weather, sympathize with grievances about dinner, and offer unsolicited advice on how to avoid the matron's wrath. For every rule they enforce, there's another they quietly ignore. turning a blind eye to late-night chess games or sneaked second helpings of stewed apples. They are the confidants of the homesick, the gently teasing older siblings of the restless, and, on particularly long afternoons, the only audience for your latest rant about the injustice of turnips. Of course, orderlies aren't just unsung heroes. They're also the asylum's resident straight men in a never-ending comedy of errors. When the therapy goat, brought in for calming interaction, escapes and sprints down the main corridor, it's an orderly who catches it, tucks it under one arm, and returns it to the garden as if this sort of thing happens daily. When someone barricades themselves in the broom closet, convinced it's a portal to Paris, it's an orderly who negotiates safe passage in exchange for a biscuit and a promise not to mention the Eiffel Tower again at group therapy. There are legends among the patients, stories of orderlies who can open any door, settle any squabble, or sleep with their eyes open during moral management hour. There's Big Tom, who can carry 2 full laundry baskets and a fainting patient at the same time, and Miss Whitby, who has been known to silence an entire dining hall with a single raised eyebrow. And let's not forget old Mr. Sneed, rumoured to have worked at the asylum since the dawn of polite society, who dispenses riddles and lemon drops in equal measure. Orderlies are also the bridge between patients and the inscrutable world of doctors and matrons. Need a form filled out, a complaint delivered, or a particularly cryptic message passed to the laundry? The orderlies will handle it, with a nod, a wink, or, when necessary, a "you didn't hear it from me." By the end of your stay, you realize that orderlies are the glue holding asylum life together. They're the first to notice when you're feeling low, the first to congratulate you on a new chess victory, and the last to judge when you're caught talking to the wallpaper. Heroes, villains, and unpaid therapists, orderlies are the real heart of the Victorian madhouse, and, as you'll soon discover, you're lucky to have them on your side. The matron runs the asylum with an iron will and a feather duster. She appears everywhere at once, sniffs out unauthorized fun, and can silence a riot with a single cough. You first encounter her at breakfast, patrolling the dining hall with the precise gait of someone who's never once tripped over a carelessly placed chamber pot. Her uniform is crisp, her shoes shine brighter than most people's personalities, and her cap sits atop her head, like a small but determined crown. The staff address her in hushed tones as matron and patients practice the ancient art of becoming invisible whenever she glides by. It's rumoured that the matron hasn't slept since 1843. No matter the hour, she materializes in the corridor just as you're considering breaking a minor rule, like humming before 8 a.m. or sneaking an extra biscuit from the tea tray. Her senses are supernatural. She can detect crumbs at 50 paces and once sniffed out a smuggled copy of Frankenstein hidden in a mattress from the other side of the building. The legend goes that she can smell rebellion on your breath and identify contraband marmalade with a single chilling glance. Cleanliness is her religion. Under her watch, every bed is made with military precision, every window ledge is dusted within an inch of its life, and every uniform passes the dreaded spot check. Heaven help the patient whose slippers are not aligned just so beneath their bed. The matron conducts surprise inspections, armed only with her trusty feather duster and a notebook full of violations. If you've ever doubted that a feather duster could be wielded as a weapon, you haven't yet met her. Discipline is dispensed with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. Whisper too loudly in the corridor, and you'll be treated to the matron's side-eye, a force of nature that can freeze a grown man mid-mischief. She has a cough so withering that it can quell the rowdiest card game, and a raised eyebrow that has, on at least one occasion, caused a spontaneous outbreak of self-reflection in the men's ward. Children fear the bogeyman. Adults in the asylum fear the matron with equal fervour. She rules over tea time, bathing schedules, and the proper arrangement of library books with the authority of a minor monarch. When a crisis arises, a loose button, a missing towel, or, heaven forbid, a muddy footprint on her polished floor, she addresses the staff in clipped, efficient commands that suggest she's fought bigger battles and won. Even the doctors defer to her on matters of hygiene and discipline. silently hoping to avoid a stern talking to about the importance of hand washing. But there's another side to the matron, rumoured, rarely seen, but spoken of in whispers during quiet evenings. Some say she once smiled when a particularly nervous patient finally learned to thread a needle. Others claim she's been known to sneak an extra biscuit to the truly deserving, provided they never mention it in public. A few even insist she's read every patient's file and remembers every birthday, though she'd never let on. Still, the matron's true legacy is the sense of order she brings to chaos. Without her, the asylum would dissolve into a soup of misplaced pillows, dirty teacups, and unsanctioned giggling. She keeps the place running with the precision of a drill sergeant and the subtlety of a stage magician. Every clean corner, every quiet corridor, every rule obeyed is her invisible handiwork. As you adjust your slippers, check your bed for stray crumbs, and rehearse your best innocent face, you realize the truth. The matron isn't just the empress of cleanliness, she's the unyielding spirit of the asylum. Cross her at your peril, thank her at your own risk, and always, always tuck in your sheets. The matron is watching. Night brings hourly check-ins, footsteps echoing, doors creaking, and the unmistakable feeling that you're being watched by someone whose hobby is counting patients. You'd think the Victorian Asylum would quiet down after sunset, but that's when the real performance begins. The lights dim, the gas lamps flicker, and the corridors fill with the nervous energy of 1,000 people trying to fall asleep at the same time. But just as you're drifting off, mid-dream about escaping on a bicycle made of bread, the first inspection begins. The telltale sign, the distant metallic chime of the night orderly's keyring. It's a sound with the power to rouse the living, the dead, and anyone who's been faking sleep for the past hour. The keys jangle, a chorus of cold iron, as the orderly approaches each room in turn, unlocking, relocking, peering in, and making mysterious notations on a clipboard. No one knows what's written on those pages. You hope it's complimentary. The inspection itself is a ritual. The orderly pauses at your door, slides open a tiny panel, and peers through. If you're awake, you pretend you're not. If you're asleep, you dream that you're awake, staring back at the orderly, creating an existential feedback loop that will leave you exhausted for days. The beam of a lantern sweeps over your face, your bed, and the meticulously aligned slippers by your feet. Satisfied, the orderly moves on until next hour. Some orderlies are gentle, their footsteps muffled, and their checks no more than a ghostly glance. Others seem to relish their role, flinging open doors with the flair of a detective in a penny dreadful, always hoping to catch someone in the act. Of what, exactly, no one is sure. Maybe you're plotting escape, or composing poetry after hours, or simply daring to enjoy a midnight snack. You quickly learn to anticipate the inspection schedule. The first round comes just after nightfall, the second after the last cough in the hallway subsides, the third at that mysterious hour when time seems to stretch and fold. Some patients keep meticulous count, treating the rounds like the world's least relaxing metronome. Others try to outwit the system, setting up elaborate pillow decoys under the blankets, convinced that tonight's the night they'll slip past the watchful eyes. The real challenge is the doors. Every door has its own voice, a creak, a groan, a whimper, making stealth all but impossible. The hinges are tuned to Gothic opera, announcing every movement in a way that's both comforting, no one's sneaking in, and unsettling, no one's sneaking out. You lie there, waiting for the moment the creak stops outside your room, and the lantern light slides in, catching you mid-blink, mid-breath, mid-contemplation of why. Exactly, you're here. Occasionally, a nurse accompanies the orderly, armed with a small bottle of tonic and an air of "I'd rather be asleep too." She checks for signs of fever, distress, or, worst of all, unauthorized reading material. If caught, you might be treated to a stern lecture on the dangers of stimulating literature at bedtime. One patient claims to have lost an entire copy of Pickwick Papers this way, never to be seen again. As the hours tick by, you find yourself drifting in and out of half-sleep, lulled by the predictable rhythm of checks and the unpredictable bursts of panic every time a key rattles or a door swings wide. You learn to sleep with one eye open and one ear trained to the hall, a skill that will serve you well in future hotel stays or if you ever decide to become a security guard. By dawn, the inspections slow and fade, replaced by the shuffle of slippers and the gentle clatter of breakfast trays. You've survived another night under watchful eyes and jangling keys. You might be tired, but at least you're accounted for, right down to the last neatly folded blanket and the last lingering bit of quiet panic. You're assigned chores, gardening, laundry, or mending sheets. It's called occupational therapy, but it mostly feels like a summer job you never applied for. Each morning after roll call and the kind of breakfast that lowers your expectations for the day, you gather in the main hall and await your assignment. There's a certain tension in the air, a low-level anxiety mixed with the faint scent of cabbage and starch. The staff insists that purposeful work builds character and calms the mind, but you suspect it mostly calms the asylum's laundry budget. Gardening duty is considered the plum job if you like your dirt cold and your worms wriggly. You're handed a trowel and pointed toward the vegetable patch, where you'll spend the next hour debating whether that's a carrot or just another rock in disguise. You learn that therapeutic horticulture involves a lot of bending, squinting, and pretending you understand the life cycle of a turnip. Occasionally, a supervisor appears to offer advice. Don't pull the flowers. Those are for looking, not eating. You nod wisely, then catch the eye of a fellow patient who's been trying to grow a potato in her pocket for 3 weeks. If your skills, or your knees, aren't suited to the garden, there's always the laundry. This is the industrial heart of the asylum, a steamy, noisy world where mountains of uniforms pass through endless cycles of washing, wringing, and folding. The staff explain that clean clothes promote good hygiene and mental order, but you're mostly impressed by how long a single sock can go missing before anyone admits defeat. If you show talent, you may be entrusted with the mangle, a contraption that exists purely to remind you that machinery was once designed as a test of human endurance. Your hands never quite recover, but your forearms become the talk of the ward. Mending sheets, meanwhile, is a delicate art. You sit in a circle with other conscripted seamsters, needles poised, and work your way through a pile of linens that have clearly seen better centuries. Every hole tells a story. Every patch is a mark of quiet rebellion. There's a rhythm to it. In, out, pull tight. Try not to prick your thumb and curse out loud in front of the matron. If you're especially skilled, you might be rewarded with a darning egg, a mysterious wooden object that does nothing to improve your sewing, but looks impressively professional when the staff pass by. The least glamorous tasks are saved for those deemed in need of extra occupation. These include dusting the already spotless corridor baseboards, polishing brass doorknobs until you can see your own dismay reflected back at you, or sorting buttons by color, size, and existential significance. Some lucky souls are assigned to help in the kitchen, peeling mountains of potatoes while the cook shouts instructions over the din of boiling pots. The cook is both feared and admired, known for her ability to stretch a single carrot into enough soup for 40, and for her collection of knives sharp enough to cut tension in the dining hall. For all the talk of therapy, the reality is that work in the asylum is often about filling the hours. You're paid in mild praise, the occasional extra biscuit, and the satisfaction of knowing you've helped keep the great Victorian madhouse running. There's even a quiet camaraderie that forms in the laundry steam, the garden mud, and over the endless miles of thread and linen. You trade gossip, share tips for escaping the mangle, and dream up small rebellions, like hiding a flower between 2 sheets, or slipping a badly darned sock into the matron's basket. When the day's chores end, you're exhausted but oddly accomplished. You've survived another round of occupational therapy, cleaner, stronger, and just a bit more convinced that if you ever get out, you'll never do your own laundry again. Once a week, everyone is gathered for music therapy. Someone attempts the piano, someone else wails a folk song, and the rest of you consider feigning illness. The approach of music hour is signalled by the arrival of Mrs. Plumley, the asylum's resident music directress, a woman with more enthusiasm than sense and a piano scarf permanently draped around her shoulders. Her smile is as fixed as her hair, and her encouragement is relentless. She insists that music is the key to harmony of mind and spirit, though it's hard to feel harmonious when you're being asked to sing Greensleeves with 3 people who are tone-deaf and one who is actively angry at all stringed instruments. The room is set up like a slightly optimistic Victorian salon, with rows of hard chairs, a battered upright piano that's seen both glory days and soup spills, and a music stand so wobbly it could double as an exercise in patience. You shuffle in, hoping to sit far enough from the front that Mrs. Plumley won't lock eyes with you and demand an impromptu solo. There are whispers of, "Do you know the words?" and "Do we have to?" as patients settle in, each clutching a worn songbook as if it's a shield. The session always begins with a group sing-along. "Everyone together," Mrs. Plumley announces, pounding out the opening chords of God Save the Queen with the subtlety of a marching band. Some sing with gusto, some mumble, and a few mouth the words, hoping no one notices. The atmosphere is a peculiar blend of school assembly and public trial, with the occasional shriek from the piano's sticky middle keys adding to the suspense. Next come the therapeutic solos. Volunteers are gently coaxed, or railroaded, into performing. There's always the overconfident tenor who launches into a ballad about doomed lovers, only to forget the second verse and improvise a dramatic monologue instead. A shy soprano tries a folk tune but gets interrupted by someone's spectacular sneeze. Someone else bravely attempts the triangle, hitting it at random intervals like they're signalling for help in Morse code. Misses. Plumley claps encouragingly at everything, convinced that participation is the true victory. On especially ambitious days, she introduces musical games. One is called Guess That Tune, but the pianist's creative interpretations mean that most answers are variations of Is it chopsticks? There's also the ever-popular Name That Composer, which quickly devolves into wild guesses and polite suggestions that maybe Mr. Handel wrote everything just to be safe. In theory, music therapy is a chance to express emotion, foster camaraderie, and build confidence. In practice, it's a test of your ability to maintain a straight face while Mr. Bingham tries to harmonize with a squeaky floorboard. The matron lurks in the corner, ever watchful for outbreaks of rowdiness or unsanctioned improvisation. You make a mental note never to attempt the tambourine again after the great tambourine debacle of last week. For some, music hour is a highlight, a chance to escape routine, share memories, or reminisce about happier times. For others, it's a gentle form of torture that leaves them longing for the relative peace of laundry duty. Still, there's something undeniably uplifting about the shared experience. You may not know the second verse to the Ash Grove, but neither does anyone else, and somehow that's comforting. As the final chord rings out, mercifully in tune, for once, you file out of the music room with a mixture of relief and pride. You've survived another music hour, strengthened your sense of community, and learned that even in a Victorian asylum, nothing brings people together quite like a slightly off-key chorus and the promise of biscuits afterward. Therapy, after all, comes in many forms. Sometimes it's just about getting through the song without breaking into nervous laughter. Spiritual improvement is mandatory. The chaplain's sermon is equal parts encouragement and passive-aggressive life advice. The pews are as comfortable as a moral dilemma. Every Sunday afternoon, as the gaslights flicker and the institutional clock chimes a little too cheerily, you're rounded up and herded to the asylum's chapel. The room is painted a soothing shade of beige, presumably to inspire calm or, at the very least, discourage lively thoughts. Rows of straight-backed pews await, lined up with the kind of geometric precision that suggests a spiritual architect with a deep mistrust of curves. Seating is not so much assigned as fatefully inevitable. You find yourself squeezed between two patients, one who hums every hymn in a different key, and one who spends the entire service calculating the structural weaknesses of the altar rail. The matron presides over the back row, enforcing a code of silence with the subtle threat of an extra reflection chair session for anyone caught dozing off or, worse, giggling at the word psaltery. The chaplain arrives precisely on schedule, his black robes fluttering, and his expression radiating the weary optimism of a man determined to save souls who'd really just like a nap. His opening prayer is earnest, lengthy, and occasionally lost to the sound of stomachs rumbling. He welcomes everyone to another week of moral improvement, gently implying that the state of your soul is not so much a work in progress as a lost and found case. Sermons begin with a story. Sometimes it's about the virtue of patience. Patience is a gift, especially when you've spent the week mending sheets for other people's beds, or the importance of gratitude. Be grateful for small mercies, like the absence of surprise hydrotherapy on Sundays. Then comes the main event, the sermon proper. It's equal parts pep talk, guilt trip, and surprisingly detailed instructions for how to find spiritual solace in a room that smells faintly of musty hymnals and boiled turnip. There's always a moment when the chaplain pivots to practical advice. Be kind to one another, offer help where you can, and for heaven's sake, please stop carving messages into the pews, which is met with a sea of innocent faces and at least one patient attempting to whittle quietly under their shawl. Occasionally, he references the great philosophers, though mostly he prefers to quote Queen Victoria. Keep calm and eat your bread, as Her Majesty might have said. Hymns are a group effort, led by Mrs. Plumley, fresh from music hour, and clutching a hymnal like it contains state secrets. The organ wheezes to life, keys sticking on every other note, and the congregation launches into 40 minutes of communal singing. Some voices soar, others croak, but all are equally determined to finish each verse as quickly as possible. The chaplain beams, convinced that harmony is merely a matter of spirit and volume, not pitch or rhythm. As the sermon winds down, there is a final prayer for moral fortitude and better weather. The chaplain blesses the staff for their patience, especially those who survived the Great Turnip Incident, prays for the patient's swift recovery, and issues a subtle warning about the perils of spiritual idleness. Amen is echoed by everyone, even those who have spent the entire service planning their next attempt at creative escape. You file out, legs numb, soul theoretically uplifted, and mind quietly amused. The matron stands at the door, dispensing nods of approval or, for the unfortunate few, reminders to sit up straighter next time. The rest of Sunday stretches before you, peaceful, if you ignore the faint ringing in your ears from hymn number 5. In the Victorian Asylum, spiritual improvement may be mandatory, but the real miracle is making it through a 40-minute hymn marathon without succumbing to a fit of the giggles or an existential crisis. When the day comes to leave, no one really knows if you're better. You're handed back your real clothes, a bill for services rendered, and a strong suggestion not to talk about anything you saw. Discharge Day is an event shrouded in equal parts mystery and bureaucratic confetti. Rumours circulate through the wards for days beforehand. Someone is getting out. Did they escape? Did the Queen intervene? Or did the staff simply realise that one more week of your poetry would drive the matron to take up hydrotherapy herself? The answer, as always, is less dramatic. You have simply reached the end of your therapeutic journey. Or, more likely, your family has reached the end of their patience and savings. The process begins with a visit from the head doctor, who arrives armed with a clipboard and a stack of vague questions. "How are we feeling today?" he asks, as if your sanity could be measured in teaspoons. He records your answers with a flourish, adds a few Latin terms for good measure, and gives a cryptic nod. "Much improved," he concludes, whether you answer with "ready for the world" or still suspicious of the wallpaper. Next comes the ceremonial return of your personal effects. The nurse arrives with a parcel containing your old clothes, which feels strangely unfamiliar after weeks spent in institutional stripes. You check the pockets. One lost handkerchief, two mysterious crumbs, and a pebble you definitely didn't bring with you. You are not reunited with the secret note you slipped into the mattress, or the lucky spoon you borrowed from the dining hall. Some treasures, it seems, are left behind for future generations. Then, the bill is presented. It's itemized in impressive detail. Meals, regardless of taste, baths, regardless of temperature, and entertainment, regardless of enjoyment. Medical consultation appears several times, as does laundry service and miscellaneous distress. The cost of your rest cure is right there in black and white, a reminder that even in Victorian times, there's no such thing as a free lie-down. You're invited to pay at your convenience, which is a quaint way of saying immediately, please, or we'll send the matron after you. Before you depart, the matron herself appears, gliding in with her feather duster and a farewell speech disguised as last-minute advice. She checks your collar for dust, reminds you to stand up straight, and gives you a look that says, "You'd better not undo all my hard work out there." She hands you a pamphlet on mental hygiene for the modern gentleman or lady, which is mostly reminders to avoid excitement and always eat your turnips. The last stop is the exit interview. Here, you are gently encouraged not to discuss your time inside, especially not the finer points of hydrotherapy, surprise mustard foot baths, or the rotating chair. A matter of privacy, the staff insists, for everyone's peace of mind. You're given a final, ambiguous diagnosis, something safely non-committal like recovered sufficiently or stable for now. If you ask for your medical records, you're given a sheaf of papers with most of the good parts redacted. When the doors finally open, you step out blinking into the daylight, your head filled with half-remembered sermons, the smell of carbolic soap, and the distant sound of someone reciting multiplication tables backward. You look back one last time. The gates close with a thud of finality, and you realize you've survived the asylum, a little wiser, a little warier, and now the proud owner of a bill and a pamphlet no one will ever read. Outside, the world seems noisier, brighter, and a bit more absurd. Are you cured? Who can say? But you're free. Free to tell your story, or more likely to shake your head, smile mysteriously, and answer, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." You're free, technically. But everyone you meet now looks at you like you might start reciting Shakespeare backwards at any moment. The only thing more exhausting than the asylum is pretending it never happened. Your return to the real world begins with a parade of suspiciously polite relatives. They greet you at the gate with forced cheer, clutching their hats and avoiding eye contact, as though you've just come back from a distant colony, or perhaps the moon. There are plenty of hugs, but even more meaningful glances, all of them loaded with unspoken questions. Are you the same? Are you better? Did you bring home any experimental leeches? On the walk home, neighbours peek through lace curtains, performing the time-honoured art of not looking while definitely watching. Mrs. Tuttle from across the street pretends to water her flowers for the third time that morning, just to get a good look. The milkman offers a too earnest, "Lovely morning, isn't it?" and backs away as though you might be contagious. The baker's apprentice gives you a nervous half-wave, then quickly fumbles a tray of rolls. It's Victorian England, and nothing spreads faster than fresh gossip, except, perhaps, tuberculosis. You find yourself cast in the role of minor celebrity and major curiosity. Invitations to tea become slightly fewer, though you're always welcome if the local vicar is looking for a lively discussion about the dangers of nervous excitement. Some people ask gentle, roundabout questions. How was your rest? Or did you learn any new hobbies? Others don't ask anything at all, choosing instead to speak very slowly and clearly, as if you've returned with an invisible sign reading, "Handle with care." At home, life is a minefield of careful conversations and awkward silences. Your family tries their best, but there's a new rule book that no one's willing to read aloud. Dinner topics are kept meticulously bland. No one mentions the words asylum, institution, or hydrotherapy. The closest anyone gets is when your aunt brings up the subject of taking the waters, but she means at Bath, not in an ice-cold tub with a nurse holding a stopwatch. The real challenge is reclaiming your old routines. You return to work, if you had work, and discover that your desk has been repurposed for storing old account books and one large potted fern. Your employer is polite but slightly wary, as if you might suddenly leap onto the table and start a one-person reenactment of Hamlet. You reassure everyone you're simply delighted to be back. But even you start to wonder if you're using too many adverbs or not making enough eye contact. Social gatherings take on a new flavour. Friends ask if you're feeling well in the same tone used to inquire about a contagious rash. The local children regard you with awe, and one particularly bold urchin asks if you met anyone famous, perhaps Napoleon or the Queen in disguise. At church, the congregation prays for your continued tranquility, a phrase that makes you want to sing Greensleeves at the top of your lungs just to see what happens. There are, of course, some silver linings. You develop a keen sense for dodging awkward questions and perfect the art of the knowing, mysterious smile. You learn to avoid anyone who uses the word nervous more than twice in a conversation. And, for the rest of your days, you will always have a secret camaraderie with anyone who's ever uttered the phrase, "It's not as bad as it sounds, really." In the end, the outside world is its own kind of asylum, one where the walls are invisible and the keys are social graces. You might not be cured, but you're certainly resilient, equipped with a new appreciation for privacy, hot baths, and conversations about literally anything other than your condition. And if, late at night, you catch yourself whispering multiplication tables backwards, at least now you know you're in good company. Before you've even unpacked, the resident phrenologist appears, running cold fingers over your scalp and declaring, with utter confidence, that your bump of mischief is highly developed. Never mind your actual symptoms. In Victorian science, it's all about head lumps and wild guesses. Phrenology is the crown jewel of dubious Victorian medical practices, a field built on the revolutionary idea that every aspect of your personality, destiny, and dinner preferences can be divined from the subtle undulations of your skull. The asylum, always eager to remain on the cutting edge of 19th century nonsense, takes this pseudoscience very seriously indeed. There's a chart pinned to the examination room wall featuring a disembodied head, cheerfully labelled with regions like secretiveness, combativeness, and bread affinity. Your initial assessment is conducted by Dr. Pickering, the asylum's official phrenologist and part-time enthusiast of odd hats. He glides into your room with the air of a man about to deliver a rousing lecture on the tragic fate of overcooked vegetables. Producing a pair of tiny calipers and a measuring tape, he bids you sit up straight. No easy feat when your bed has all the support of a deflated jellyfish. The ritual begins. He squints, hums thoughtfully, and meticulously traces the topography of your skull as if mapping an undiscovered continent. "Ah," he murmurs, a pronounced ridge of inventiveness. And here, a subtle trough of punctuality. He pauses, jots down a note, possible late riser, recommend early bedtimes, and resumes his exploration. You try not to flinch when he pokes the zone of affection which, according to the chart, lies dangerously close to your left ear. It quickly becomes clear that the phrenological diagnosis is less about science and more about storytelling. Each bump is a revelation, each dip a cautionary tale. If your head is slightly lopsided, you're gifted with eccentricity. A flat patch means you're admirably humble. Too many ridges, and you're in danger of mental overexertion, the classic Victorian excuse for a nap. Dr. Pickering asks probing questions as he works. Do you enjoy reading novels or prefer the quiet satisfaction of alphabetizing spoons? Have you ever dreamt of becoming a lighthouse keeper? How do you feel about marmalade? Your answers are mostly irrelevant, as his hands are already busy confirming what he suspected when you first walked in, namely, that you have a robust organ of hope and an admirable capacity for structured regret. Other patients swap stories of their own encounters with phrenology. One man was pronounced terminally philosophical and advised to avoid deep thoughts for at least a fortnight. Another woman, after a particularly thorough examination, received the dubious honour of possessing the largest benevolent zone this side of Bath, which mostly meant she was asked to mend everyone's socks. It's a diagnosis lottery, and you can't help but feel you've won a consolation prize every time Dr. Pickering sighs appreciatively over your occipital whorls. Of course, your official medical file now contains an entire section devoted to cranial geography. The staff pore over it with furrowed brows, debating whether your generosity bump qualifies you for extra pudding or just extra reflection time. The doctors, sensing an opportunity for further research, suggest follow-up measurements every other Thursday in case your skull decides to shift and reveal new secrets. In the end, you're left with a sense of vague amusement and a lingering headache. Phrenology, it turns out, is mostly an excuse for strangers to poke your head and declare you interesting. You rejoin your fellow patients, all of whom sport equally creative diagnoses, and share a knowing look. Whatever your actual troubles, at least you can take comfort in knowing that in the Victorian Asylum, your head lumps are the most fascinating thing about you. And if you ever tire of hydrotherapy, there's always another round of cranial fortune-telling to keep things lively. Afternoons are reserved for wholesome entertainment. Card games with missing cards, elaborate puzzles missing the last piece, and charades so competitive that someone inevitably storms off muttering about the decline of standards in polite society, all in the name of mental health. Recreation hour is supposed to be the bright spot of your day, a gentle, restorative break from moral management and hydrotherapy. The staff, ever enthusiastic, wheel out a battered cabinet of amusements, their faces filled with hope and the faintest hint of desperation. They assure you that games are scientifically proven to build character, coordination, and cheerful disposition. You suspect they're mostly proven to fill the hour until tea. First up, card games. The institution boasts a collection of decks, each more incomplete than the last. You gather with fellow patients to play whist or beggar, my neighbour, though both games are complicated by the suspicious absence of all the queens and half the hearts. Someone attempts to play poker, only to discover that bluffing is difficult when everyone's already diagnosed with excessive imagination. There are ongoing disputes over whether a missing jack counts as wild or simply misplaced due to exuberant shuffling. No one can agree, so the staff settle the matter with the asylum rule. If in doubt, the house wins. Then there are puzzles, each with the ominous warning, do not lose the last piece. Of course, the last piece was lost long before you arrived. You and your companions fit together scene after scene of pastoral bliss, only to find the sky forever incomplete and the sheep missing its head. There is always hope that someday, someone will find the missing piece under a floorboard, but until then, you get very good at pretending the puzzle is abstract. One patient suggests the missing piece is a metaphor for your mental state, which everyone agrees is both insightful and unhelpful. But the true battleground is charades. What starts as a friendly game quickly devolves into a gladiatorial contest of mime and misunderstanding. Teams are assembled with military efficiency, and clues are delivered with the dramatic flair of an amateur Shakespeare festival. Famous novel, 2 words, first word, the. After a half hour of wild gesticulation and ever wilder guesses, the Pickwick parrot, the asparagus affair, someone inevitably throws down their napkin and storms out, vowing never to play with such Philistines again. The staff, delighted by the display of passion, chalk it up as a victory for engagement and expressive outlets. Not to be outdone, board games also make an appearance. There's chess, played with mismatched pieces, and a set of rules that shift depending on the mood of the day. Checkers, with buttons standing in for missing men, becomes an exercise in improvisation and the gentle art of not losing your patience. Dominoes, meanwhile, are so well loved that half have been replaced by blank tiles or good intentions. Despite the chaos, there is an undeniable charm to recreation hour. Patients bond over shared confusion and invent new games on the spot. Guess the flavour of the pudding or spot the draft. There is a peculiar camaraderie in losing together, and a sense of accomplishment in managing to organize a game at all. The staff award points for sportsmanship and cheerful attitude, though it's never clear what the points are for, or whether they can be traded for anything except slightly less supervision. Occasionally there are organized tournaments, grand affairs that last until someone loses track of the score or a crucial game piece. Winners receive hand-drawn certificates, while losers are consoled with the promise of next week's rematch and, if they're lucky, an extra biscuit at tea. By the end of the hour, you've laughed, groaned, and perhaps muttered a few oaths about the injustice of missing puzzle pieces. For a little while, the walls of the asylum feel just a bit farther apart, and the line between madness and simple, glorious boredom gets pleasantly blurry. Recreation, after all, is about forgetting where you are, even if it's just for the length of a very competitive game of charades. Life in the women's ward is a parade of corsets, embroidery hoops, and gentle accusations of female hysteria. Reading novels is considered risky. Excessive walking is suspicious. If you sigh too loudly. A nurse prescribes more rest and a cup of soothing beef tea. The day begins with a symphony of rustling petticoats and whispered complaints about stays laced just a little too tightly. The matron of the women's ward, a woman who can spot an unfastened button from 20 paces, makes her rounds with the solemnity of a high priestess and the efficiency of a wind-up clock. She inspects every bed, ensures every hair is neatly pinned, and dispenses moral encouragement in the form of mild threats and recommendations for further embroidery. Occupational therapy in the women's ward is all about ladylike pursuits. You're handed an embroidery hoop and a selection of thread, never read, which is deemed too exciting, and set to work creating samplers with uplifting aphorisms. Patience is a virtue. A tidy ward is a happy ward, and the ever-popular do not sigh so loudly. Should you finish your sampler too quickly, you're either praised for your efficiency or, more likely, handed another. You soon learn that the true therapy is not in the stitching, but in trying to avoid stabbing yourself out of sheer frustration. Conversation is monitored for tone, volume, and subject matter. Discussing the news is a dangerous game. Mention the suffrage movement, and you're likely to earn an extra hour in the quiet room, which is, ironically, the loudest space in the building thanks to its location next to the pipes. Any excitement, whether a heated debate about Dickens or an animated retelling of a dream, is met with the suspicion that your nerves might be acting up again. Reading is a particular minefield. Novels, especially by certain women writers, are locked away except on Sunday afternoons, and even then, you're only permitted to read aloud in groups. Presumably so the staff can monitor for outbreaks of imagination. One resident was caught sneaking a copy of Jane Eyre under her pillow and was immediately prescribed 2 days of staring at a soothing beige wall and a ban on dessert. The message is clear. Too much plot leads straight to a diagnosis of overexcitement. Movement is closely regulated. Walks are to be taken at a stately pace, with no sudden bursts of enthusiasm or suspicious detours toward the kitchen. If you ask to walk alone, it's noted in your file, and you're gently encouraged to take a nap instead. Some patients stage quiet rebellions by walking in extra-wide circles during garden hour, pretending not to notice when they pass the same statue 3 times in a row. One memorable afternoon, a daring trio walked briskly for a full minute before being intercepted by an alarmed nurse who insisted they sit down and have more beef tea. Speaking of beef tea, it is the miracle cure for all feminine woes, at least according to the nurses. Feeling tired? Beef tea. Suffering from ennui? Beef tea. Regretting your 3rd embroidery sampler of the day? Beef tea with extra sympathy. It's a lukewarm, salty elixir that's supposed to restore vitality, but mostly tastes like someone whispered cow into a tepid mug of water. Above all, rest is prescribed for every ailment. If you sigh, you must rest. If you fidget, you must rest. If you show any sign of independent thought, you must rest, preferably in your neatly made bed, contemplating the virtues of silence, restraint, and accepting that, in the women's ward, restlessness is not a sign of boredom, but a medical condition in itself. In the Victorian Asylum, the women's ward is a masterclass in enforced tranquility, a place where corsets are tight, novels are suspicious, and a single loud sigh can send the staff into a flurry of therapeutic interventions. And if all else fails, there's always beef tea. Once a week, the doctors perform their ceremonial stroll, dispensing Latin phrases and eyebrow raises. Each visit is a dramatic monologue about moral fibre, fresh air, and why your fondness for reading poetry is probably a symptom. The approach of doctors' rounds is heralded by a parade of polished boots and the faint scent of camphor. You can hear the low drone of Latin medical terms echoing down the corridor before you see the physicians themselves. 3, sometimes 4, sometimes an entire flock if a new treatment is in fashion. Their uniforms are impeccable, black frock coats, starched cuffs, and hats set at angles that suggest an afternoon spent rehearsing in front of a mirror. They sweep into the ward as if making a grand entrance at the opera. The lead doctor, always the most senior, and therefore most convinced of his own infallibility, carries a notebook large enough to double as a weapon. His assistant trails behind, prepared to transcribe your fate in illegible cursive and occasionally hand out a mysterious tonic or two. If you're especially lucky, a medical student lurks at the back, silently cataloguing your every twitch for a future treatise on the nervous dispositions of the common Victorian. The ritual begins at bed 1, and you can track the progress of the round by the rising volume of motivational platitudes and the gentle thud of someone fainting from sheer anticipation. Each patient receives the full treatment, a brisk inquiry after one's bowels. Regularity is the keystone of sanity. A brief poke at the wrist to check your humour, and the kind of probing questions that double as accusations. How many hours do you sleep? The doctor intones, eyebrows arched to maximum suspicion. If you answer not enough, you're diagnosed with nervous agitation and prescribed extra rest. If you say too many, it's a clear case of melancholic torpor, and you're prescribed, wait for it, extra fresh air. The ideal answer remains a mystery, as does the reasoning behind half the advice dispensed. No visit is complete without a monologue. The doctor pauses, gazes out the nearest window as if expecting divine inspiration, and launches into a lengthy speech about the dangers of moral laxity and the importance of hard work. A sound mind in a sound body, he declares, despite the fact that no one present feels particularly sound in either respect. The ward is then treated to an enthusiastic lecture on the therapeutic virtues of sunshine, knitting, and naturally, moderate consumption of root vegetables. Your fondness for books is always suspect. The doctor peers over his spectacles, as if trying to catch you in the act of thinking. Too much reading leads to unproductive rumination, he warns, especially poetry. It's been known to cause fits of idealism and chronic sighing. You nod, hiding the copy of Wordsworth under your pillow, and promise to focus more on embroidery and less on the perils of iambic pentameter. The assistant doctor, desperate to leave a good impression, chimes in with their own recommendations. Drink more water, boiled of course. Take up gentle calisthenics, no leaping. And practice daily self-examination, but not in public. The student remains silent, scribbling feverishly, perhaps making a mental note to never mention the word rest cure in polite company. The highlight of rounds is the prescription of mysterious tonics, each with a taste profile somewhere between cough syrup and boot polish. You're assured that regular consumption will cure all ills, from existential dread to minor headaches, though the only immediate effect is the development of a lifelong aversion to licorice. By the end of the circuit, the doctors have dispensed a week's worth of unsolicited advice, a small collection of questionable Latin, and enough eyebrow raises to last until next Sunday. The doctors vanish as suddenly as they appeared, leaving you with a fresh sense of confusion, a bottle of tonic, and the gentle suspicion that, in the grand scheme of things, the only real cure is a well-timed nap. Doctors' rounds, the Victorian Asylum's answer to medical care, public theatre, and all-purpose moral guidance. So tonight, as you nestle into your pillow and savor the blissful silence of your own, hopefully not haunted, bedroom, maybe take a quiet moment to be grateful. Grateful for indoor plumbing, for mattresses that don't crunch, for privacy that doesn't involve a matron with a keyring the size of a frying pan. Maybe even grateful that your next meal probably isn't boiled cabbage surprise, unless you actually like that sort of thing, in which case you're braver than most Victorians. Because the dark truth behind Victorian asylums isn't just about suffering or questionable treatments involving cold baths and mustard plasters, or doctors diagnosing you with excessive curiosity. It's also a story of survival, of stubborn people getting through the day, making do with thin blankets and thick skulls, finding moments of humanity in places designed to erase it. It's proof that, no matter the century, people have always found ways to keep their humour alive, even if it was just muttering jokes about the dinner stew or the doctor's wildly experimental facial hair. So, as you drift off tonight, remember, history is uncomfortable, sometimes horrifying, and always more absurd than we imagine. But it's also a reminder that you are descended from people who endured all of this and somehow still managed to keep going, to hope, to laugh at the absurdity of it all. May your dreams tonight be free of phrenologists, straitjackets, and surprise hydrotherapy. May your only visitors be the kind that bring snacks, not clipboards. And may you wake in the morning, safe, warm, and, above all else, grateful that your sleep isn't interrupted by a nurse in Victorian stripes. Good night, time traveller. Sleep well, and thank your lucky stars for modern medicine, soft sheets, and the blessed absence of gruel.